Number 1. Stephen Kyle Goodlett. Stephen Kyle Goodlett, once a respected educator and principal of LaRue County High School in Kentucky, was a man entrusted with the safety and development of countless students. Born and raised in Kentucky, Goodlett earned a reputation as a dedicated teacher and administrator who climbed the ranks of the school system with apparent ease. By the time he was promoted to principal, he was widely viewed as a pillar of the community, someone parents and students alike could rely on. But beneath this facade of professionalism lay a disturbing secret that would shatter the trust of an entire community. In 2016, the shocking truth about Goodlett began to unravel. It started when a female student reported that her private, intimate photos, stored on her phone, had been stolen and uploaded to a Russian pornographic website. Investigators traced the source of the leak back to none other than Goodlett, who had been engaging in a calculated and deeply invasive scheme. Using his position of authority, he accessed students' phones under the pretense of routine disciplinary checks or offering technical help. During this process, he copied nude photos and videos from their devices without their knowledge. Over time, he uploaded these stolen images to pornographic websites, exploiting the victim's trust and further violating their privacy. The investigation gained traction in 2017, when multiple victims came forward with similar suspicions. Law enforcement focused on Goodlett after forensic analysis of the students' phones revealed a pattern. Detectives discovered that Goodlett had used special software to extract images from the devices. The breakthrough came when a federal investigation uncovered evidence tying him directly to the uploads. In a chilling discovery, investigators found dozens of stolen images stored on his personal devices, along with online accounts linking him to the illegal uploads. The sheer volume of evidence left no room for doubt about his guilt. Goodlett was arrested in October 2017 and charged with federal child pornography offenses. During his trial, the courtroom was gripped by the shocking details of his betrayal. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including digital footprints and testimonies from victims and their families. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from Goodlett's own devices, which contain not only the stolen photos, but also explicit logs of his online activity. The defense attempted to argue that Goodlett suffered from mental health issues, but the prosecution emphasized the premeditated and systematic nature of his crimes. In 2018, Stephen Kyle Goodlett was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison, followed by a lifetime of supervised release. He was also required to register as a sex offender. At his sentencing, the judge condemned his actions as a gross abuse of power and a violation of the trust placed in him by students and their families. As of May 2025, Goodlett remains incarcerated, serving his sentence in a federal prison. His crimes left an indelible scar on the LaRue County community, forcing schools across the region to reevaluate their policies regarding student privacy and the handling of personal devices. The case serves as a chilling reminder of the potential for exploitation by those in positions of authority. For the victims, the emotional impact of his betrayal is a burden they will likely carry for the rest of their lives. Number 2. J.C. Smith. J.C. Smith, a former principal of Upper Marion Area High School in Pennsylvania, was once a respected figure in his community. Known for his strict demeanor and military background, Smith had served as a colonel in the Army Reserve before transitioning to a career in education. By the 1970s, he had climbed the ranks to become the principal at Upper Marion, a position that placed him at the heart of the school system and made him a familiar face to students and parents alike. However, beneath the surface of his professional accomplishments lay a dark and deeply disturbing story that would eventually come to light. On June 25, 1979, Susan Reinert, a 36-year-old English teacher at Upper Marion, was found brutally murdered. Her lifeless body was discovered stuffed in the trunk of her car at a hotel parking lot in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. She had been stripped naked, beaten, and bound, with her cause of death determined to be a combination of blunt force trauma and suffocation. Strangely, her 2 children, Karen and Michael, aged 11 and 10, were missing. Despite a massive search effort, their bodies were never found, adding an agonizing layer of mystery to an already horrifying crime. The investigation into Susan Reinert's murder exposed a tangled web of deceit, greed, and betrayal. Authorities quickly honed in on two suspects: J.C. Smith and William Bradfield, a charismatic fellow teacher at Upper Merion who had reportedly been having an affair with Reinert. The two men were linked through a mutual disdain for Reinert, but their motives were far more insidious than personal grievances. Investigators uncovered evidence suggesting that Smith and Bradfield had conspired to murder Reinert in order to collect on her substantial life insurance policy, for which Bradfield was named the beneficiary. The crime itself was chilling in its methodical execution. Evidence suggested that Susan Reinert had been lured to meet Bradfield under the pretense of a romantic getaway. Unbeknownst to her, Smith was lying in wait. After subduing Reinert, Smith and Bradfield allegedly tortured and killed her, disposing of her body in a manner designed to obscure the exact timeline of events. It is believed that the children were killed shortly thereafter, though their remains were never recovered. The investigation into J.C. Smith was complex and fraught with challenges. Police initially focused on Bradfield, whose contradictory statements and suspicious behavior raised red flags. However, as they delved deeper into Smith's background, a far more sinister picture emerged. In 1978, Smith had been arrested for an armed robbery at a Sears store, during which he had been caught with multiple weapons, syringes filled with liquid, and incriminating notes about Susan Reinert. This discovery, combined with testimony from Bradfield's associates, eventually led authorities to charge Smith with the murders. The trial of J.C. Smith in 1986 was a media sensation, drawing widespread attention for its shocking revelations and dramatic twists. Prosecutors presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence, including Smith's suspicious behavior, his possession of materials linked to the crime, and his financial struggles, which they argued provided a motive for murder. Key testimony came from Bradfield's acquaintances, who recounted conversations in which he had implicated Smith in the plot. However, the defense argued that the case against Smith was purely circumstantial, and relied heavily on the credibility of individuals with their own motives to lie. Despite the lack of direct physical evidence tying him to the murder scene, Smith was convicted of the murders of Susan Reinert and her two children. He was sentenced to death and sent to Pennsylvania's death row, a decision that brought a sense of closure to some, but left others questioning the fairness of the trial. In 1992, however, Smith's conviction was overturned by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which cited prosecutorial misconduct and mishandling of evidence as grounds for their decision. Smith was released after serving approximately 6 years in prison. As of May 2025, J.C. Smith is no longer incarcerated, but the case remains a haunting reminder of the flaws in the justice system and the devastating consequences of greed and betrayal. The murders of Susan Reinert and her children shattered the Upper Merion community, leaving behind a legacy of pain and unanswered questions. To this day, the case continues to provoke debate, not only about Smith's guilt or innocence, but also about the responsibilities of those entrusted with upholding justice. Number 3. Claude Francis Guimond. Claude Francis Guimond was the respected principal of Sa-King Anitinabe High School in Manitoba, Canada. For years he was seen as a mentor and role model in his tight-knit Indigenous community. Known for his strict discipline, personal integrity, and deep commitment to youth education, Guimond had spent decades in education, guiding troubled students and confronting the systemic issues of poverty and addiction that plagued his reserve. But behind the calm authority of an educator, a storm had been brewing, one that would erupt in a violent act of vigilante justice. On the night of June 14, 2019, Guimond drove to a rural property near Fort Alexander, where two local men, known drug dealers in the area, had been operating out of a trailer. The community had been overwhelmed with drug-related deaths and overdoses, and many residents, including Guimond, believed law enforcement had turned a blind eye. According to court records, Guimond entered the trailer armed with a hunting rifle. He shot both men, 26-year-old Trevor Bitternose and 30-year-old Ryan Moose, execution style, then fled the scene. Their bodies were discovered 2 days later after neighbors reported a foul smell and suspicious silence from the usually active trailer. The investigation into the murders quickly turned toward Guimond, when one witness reported seeing his truck near the scene. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station captured him purchasing fuel and food shortly before the estimated time of the killings. Forensic evidence further tied him to the crime. Tire tracks matched his vehicle, and ballistic tests confirmed the bullets came from a rifle found buried behind his home. On July 4, 2019, Guimond was arrested at his residence without incident. During the trial, held in early 2021, the prosecution painted a picture of premeditated murder. They cited a journal found in Guimond's home that described his frustrations with local authorities and his growing belief that someone had to do something about the drug epidemic. The defense, in contrast, argued for diminished responsibility due to psychological trauma, citing years of working in a devastated community and witnessing the deaths of former students due to drugs. The jury deliberated for 3 days before returning a guilty verdict on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Claude Francis Guimond was sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 25 years, a standard term in Canada for first-degree murder. He is currently incarcerated at Stony Mountain Institution. As of May 2025, he has served just under 6 years of his sentence. No disciplinary issues have been reported in prison, though he has remained mostly silent, declining media interviews and public statements. The case sent shockwaves through the Sagking First Nation. While some community members quietly expressed sympathy for Guimond, seeing his actions as born of desperation in a failing system, others were devastated by the betrayal of a man who had once stood as a pillar of hope. The double homicide underscored the complex tensions between justice, frustration, and vigilantism in marginalized communities, leaving scars that will not easily fade. Number 4. Timothy Dorway. Timothy Michael Dorway served for 12 years as principal of Chanhassen High School in suburban Minnesota, earning a reputation for his approachable demeanor and strong emphasis on student safety. A graduate of the University of Minnesota's education program, he had once been lauded for reducing bullying incidents and expanding the school's wellness initiatives. Colleagues described him as generous, punctual, and deeply invested in extracurricular activities, traits that made the revelations of his hidden life all the more shocking. The investigation began on November 8, 2017, when a routine scan by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children flagged Dorway's residential IP address for distributing illicit images. Behind the scenes, Homeland Security agents and local detectives quietly secured search warrants. Early the next morning, on November 9th, officers descended on his home, seizing 2 desktop computers, several external hard drives, and multiple USB sticks. Forensic analysis revealed hundreds of encrypted files containing child sexual abuse material, some dating back to 2012, and others added as recently as October 2017. Dorway was taken into custody without incident and formally charged on December 4, 2017, with 9 counts of possession of child pornography under Minnesota Statutes Section 617.246. Court documents showed he had employed a peer-to-peer file-sharing network, using a VPN to mask his activities. Investigators uncovered a pattern. Dorway periodically downloaded batches of images late at night, then deleted obvious logs to evade detection. Prosecution experts testified that the extensive encryption and file naming conventions demonstrated deliberate concealment and long-term intent, rather than a single lapse in judgment. The trial, held in Carver County District Court in May 2019, was marked by stark contrasts. The prosecution called digital forensics specialists who walked the jury through the meticulous process of decrypting files and tracing their origin. They highlighted a chilling discovery. One folder labeled School Weight contained thumbnail images showing dates and metadata placing Dorway's downloads during school breaks. The defense sought to minimize culpability by arguing that Dorway suffered from an undiagnosed impulse control disorder and had sought therapy in 2016. They presented letters from his doctor describing severe anxiety, but could not refute the technical evidence that he had knowingly curated and stored illicit content over years. On July 18, 2019, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. At sentencing on September 30, 2019, Judge Patricia H. Larson imposed a 5-year term in the Minnesota Correctional Facility Stillwater, followed by 10 years of mandatory registration on the state's sex offender registry. No fines were levied, but Dorway was ordered to undergo psychological counseling and restricted from any school or youth-related employment upon release. As of May 2025, Dorway has completed his prison term and was released under supervised release in November 2024. He is listed on Minnesota's registry through 2034 and attends monthly check-ins with probation officers. According to correctional reports, he has participated in mandated therapy, with no disciplinary infractions during his incarceration. The betrayal felt by the Chanhassen community was profound. Parents and faculty struggled to reconcile the Dorway who coached their children's basketball teams with the man who orchestrated a secret life of exploitation. The case exposed the unsettling reality that those entrusted with our youth can sometimes harbor the darkest of secrets, prompting schools statewide to reevaluate background check protocols and digital monitoring policies in hopes of preventing such a breach of trust ever again. Number 5. Wesley Ernest. Wesley Ernest was a respected educator, a former assistant principal at Jefferson Forest High School and later the acting principal at Heritage High School in Lynchburg, Virginia. To his colleagues and students, he was a commanding yet charming figure, well-educated, ambitious, and deeply involved in school affairs. He had earned multiple degrees, including a master's in educational leadership, and presented himself as a man of discipline and promise. But behind the carefully curated professional image was a man unraveling under the weight of financial pressures, a failing marriage, and a desperate desire to maintain control. On December 19, 2008, Wesley drove across the state to Forest, Virginia. His estranged wife, Jocelyn Ernest, a successful financial analyst at Genworth Financial, had filed for divorce. Their 7-bedroom home, once a symbol of status, had become a battleground over assets and image. That evening, Wesley entered the house they once shared. At some point between 7:30 and 9 p.m., he shot Jocelyn in the back of the head with a .357 Magnum revolver. He then locked the family dog in a crate, set the thermostat to 90 degrees to speed decomposition, and placed a typed suicide note beside her body before leaving the scene. The note contained language implicating Wesley for financial ruin and relationship troubles, but investigators would later discover it had been printed on a computer model not found in Jocelyn's home. Jocelyn's body was discovered the next day by a concerned friend. Early observations led investigators to believe the scene had been staged. The heat, the placement of the body, and the tone of the suicide note all appeared inconsistent. A forensic analysis revealed Wesley's fingerprints on the note, and digital forensics traced its creation back to a computer in Wesley's possession. Cell phone records, fuel receipts, and surveillance footage placed him in the area at the time of the murder, despite his claim that he had spent the evening watching television at his apartment in Chesapeake. The borrowed truck he drove that night had recently undergone a tire change and was later found to contain traces of bleach. His first trial in early 2010 ended in mistrial due to juror misconduct. However, in a retrial that November, prosecutors laid out a meticulous case, highlighting how Wesley had even tried to mimic Jocelyn's handwriting in therapy documents to bolster the illusion of suicide. After a 9-day trial, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and use of a firearm in the commission of a felony. In January 2011, Wesley Ernest was sentenced to life in prison plus 3 years. He is currently incarcerated at Sussex Wanny State Prison, a maximum security facility in Virginia. As of May 2025, he remains behind bars with no parole eligibility due to Virginia's sentencing laws. The murder sent shockwaves through the Lynchburg community and beyond. A trusted principal, once seen as a role model, had orchestrated the calculated murder of his wife to avoid personal and financial humiliation. The betrayal of public trust and the coldness of the crime remain a sobering reminder that even the most admired faces can hide the darkest truths. Number 6. Cornelius Greene. Cornelius Greene was once a respected figure in St. Louis's educational circles. As principal of Vashon High School in Missouri, Greene was entrusted with shaping young minds and setting a standard for integrity in leadership. Behind closed doors, however, the facade of professionalism concealed a harrowing secret. Greene, a married man and father, had been engaged in an affair with a fellow educator, 30-year-old Jocelyn Peters. When she became pregnant in early 2016, what should have been a private reckoning turned into one of the city's most disturbing crimes. On March 24, 2016, Jocelyn Peters was found shot in the head in her St. Louis apartment. She was 7 months pregnant with Greene's child. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing had been stolen, suggesting a targeted killing. At first, Greene presented himself as distraught, even helping coordinate school responses to the tragedy. But the investigation quickly took a darker turn. Detectives learned that Greene had left town and traveled to Chicago the day of the murder. Surveillance video showed him boarding a train just before the estimated time of death. Meanwhile, text messages and call records revealed he had been in close contact with an ex-convict named Michael Gordon, a man with a violent criminal history. Further digital evidence, including GPS tracking and deleted texts recovered through forensic analysis, suggested Greene had orchestrated a murder-for-hire plot, paying Gordon to carry out the execution while creating an alibi for himself. In 2017, Greene was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Gordon was apprehended separately and eventually cooperated with prosecutors, revealing damning details about their planning, payment exchanges, and Greene's explicit instructions to kill both Peters and the unborn child. The motive, prosecutors argued, was clear. Greene wanted to protect his reputation, career, and family life, fearing that the scandal of a child born from an affair would destroy everything he had built. The case dragged on for years due to delays, appeals, and evidentiary battles. But in 2024, after a lengthy trial filled with graphic testimony and digital forensic evidence, a Missouri jury convicted Greene of 2 counts of first-degree murder, one for Jocelyn and one for her unborn child. The court imposed 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As of May 2025, Cornelius Greene remains incarcerated in a maximum security facility in Missouri. He is not eligible for parole and is expected to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Michael Gordon also received a lengthy sentence, but was spared the death penalty due to his cooperation. The emotional impact of the case was immense. Greene's betrayal of trust as an educator shook the St. Louis community to its core. Jocelyn Peters was remembered as a passionate and compassionate teacher. Her life and the life of her unborn child extinguished by a man driven by cowardice and ego. For many, the trial marked the end of a haunting chapter, but the legacy of the victims lives on in every student she once inspired. Number 7. Leslie Chance. Leslie Chance was the principal of Fairview Elementary School in Bakersfield, California. A respected figure known for her strong leadership, involvement in education, and an outward image of stability. Married to Todd Chance, a former truck driver, Leslie seemed to embody a model of personal and professional success. But behind closed doors, a tangled web of infidelity, fear, and calculated betrayal was tightening, leading to a crime that would shock the Kern County community. On August 25, 2013, Todd Chance's body was discovered in an almond orchard outside Bakersfield. He had been shot multiple times at close range. His car was found abandoned in a different location, wiped clean of fingerprints. Initially, authorities had few leads. There were no witnesses to the killing, no obvious signs of robbery, and Todd's life appeared, on the surface, unremarkable. However, a painstaking investigation would soon uncover a chilling truth. Todd's wife, Leslie Chance, had orchestrated and carried out the murder. In the early stages, Leslie acted the part of the grieving widow, but inconsistencies quickly emerged. Surveillance footage from the morning of Todd's death showed a woman matching Leslie's description parking Todd's black Dodge Charger in a residential neighborhood and walking away casually. Investigators tracked Leslie's movements through security cameras, GPS data, and even neighborhood surveillance, ultimately piecing together her attempt to eliminate any ties to the crime scene. Her motive, prosecutors argued, was to silence Todd permanently. Leslie had been conducting an affair with a former boyfriend via text and email, a relationship she was desperate to keep hidden from public and professional scrutiny. Killing Todd, they contended, was a desperate attempt to preserve her image and free herself from an unwanted marriage. Leslie was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in 2013, but delays, appeals, and complex legal wrangling pushed the trial back several years. When it finally began in 2019, the prosecution presented a powerful array of evidence: surveillance footage, cell phone tower pings, forensic analysis of the abandoned vehicle, and a pattern of secret communications with her lover. Defense attorneys argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that the case was built on inferences rather than direct proof. Nonetheless, the jury found Leslie Chance guilty. In early 2020, Leslie was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. She was transferred to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, one of the largest women's prisons in the United States. As of May 2025, she remains incarcerated, with parole eligibility not expected for many years. The emotional and societal impact of the case was profound. A trusted educator, someone responsible for the care and development of children, had committed one of the most cold-blooded betrayals imaginable. The Bakersfield community was left grappling with a hard truth: that evil can hide behind even the most respected faces, and sometimes the greatest threats come from those closest to home.